Hello, everyone, and good day to all of you. Welcome to the third annual Tasveer South Asia Lit Fest. My name is Ishita Saran, and I'm one of the TSAL coordinators and the moderator for today's event. As some of you might know, as most of you might know, Tasveer is a Seattle-based arts organization whose mission is to amplify South Asian voices through film, literature, and storytelling. This year, the Tasveer Lit Fest and the Tasveer Film Festival have been combined to form the Tasveer Festival, Watch, Read, Talk. This 24-day festival showcases the best in South Asian film, literature, and storytelling. I would like to extend my thanks to Rita Meher, the co-founder and ED of Tasveer, Alka Kurian, the director of TSAL, and the entire TSAL team for the amount of time they have put in to work to put this festival together. I would also like to thank all the authors for agreeing to be part of the panels. And now, without further ado, I welcome you to today's panel discussion, Curious Imaginings. As the name implies, this panel is for the curious young minds of the youngest members of our community. Join us as we figure out how to join us as we converse about the ways in which we come together around cultural rituals, as well as figure out how to shake off internalized barriers and forge ahead in our lives. Today, our panelists are Sheetal, Sheth and Zenia Wadhwani. Sheetal is an acclaimed actress, author, producer, and activist. She is known for her performances in a wide range of memorable roles on film and television. Her first children's book, Always Anjali, was published in 2018 to wide acclaim and won the 2019 Purple Dragonfly Storybook Grand Prize. It is set to be a part of a series and is the first and only in this age group featuring an Indian American girl hero. Today, we'll be discussing her latest in this series, Bravo Anjali. Our next panelist, Zenia Wadhwani, has spent most of her career in the nonprofit sector and more recently in the area of corporate citizenship, specializing in community engagement, stakeholder relations, and diversity and inclusion. Zenia lives in Toronto and proudly sits on the board of the Children's Book Bank, a small charitable organization that ensures all kids have access to books. So welcome, Zenia and Sheetal, and thank you so much for being a part of this panel.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. So diving right in, I was an avid reader from a very young age and was always in awe of authors who've been, of all authors basically, who have chosen to write in this field. So I've always wondered, what exactly inspires you to write children's literature? Sheetal, if you would like to go first.
Sure. I have worked with kids my whole life. And when I say that, I'm not overstating it. Literally since I was like 4 or 5 years old, I have been very involved in my community. Service is a big part of my life. Whatever age I was doing the appropriate thing, whether it be in elementary school, middle school, high school. I would go to the younger kids and create, skits, plays, talks. Like I was always that person. I took a ton of elementary school education classes when I was at college. I went to college for acting. Acting is, I've been doing that. Most people know me as an actress for over 20 years, but I really think of myself as a storyteller and I love telling stories. And so for me, the medium is less important than really getting the stories out there. And so when I started writing children's books, it really combined all of my loves in the sense of being able to tell stories, working with kids. I felt there was a huge hole in the market in terms of what I was seeing. And so I was hoping to put my kind of my take on things out there and creating something that I wished existed when I was around and wanted to make sure that my kids wouldn't have the same feelings I did growing up.
Got it. That's interesting. So I'll come back to that. Zenia, what are your thoughts on this? What inspired you?
Yeah, I think, some similarities to Sheetal for sure in terms of, just that. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Go ahead. Sorry.
I think definitely some similarities to, what Sheetal was saying about, that lack of finding what it is that you want out there. And I very much agree. I think we all have stories in us to tell. And I think, when I had my daughter and and we're big readers in our house and there's books all over the place, and the books started coming in for her, and really not seeing the kind of diverse representation in those books that I had hoped or expected to see. That sort of instigated for me that I needed to, and so this story that I've written has been probably, in the making when she was in my womb. Like that's where the character sort of came about. The story took, quite a while to come out after that, but I think it was really wanting for her to see herself in stories and for that diversity in stories.
Okay. So you bring up an interesting point about storytelling and wishing that you had someone in when you were younger to kind of tell you these stories. So I was just wondering, would you think that, especially for the kids in the diaspora today, in today's times, would you think that you're kind of taking the place of the so-called nannies and dadis and the grandmothers who would tell stories to us as kids, especially for kids growing up in India? So you think you're taking the place of the grandmother, the role of the grandmother through your storybooks?
Well, I don't think you can ever take place of, our grandparents. Our grandparents and our parents and our families are so special in what they do, and there's nothing that can replicate or replace them.
Right.
I really, for me, and I think the stories that they tell are specific to your family and what they grew up in. And I think there's something so amazing about that. And I wouldn't want to even touch that. But I think for me, it was really about putting narratives out there that I felt centered and normalized us. Something that I found to be really frustrating is that if I did find books that had, brown characters or a lot of different cultures at the center of it, it was always around an extraordinary event, a religion, a holiday, mythology, religion. And, what I always like to say is like, do you know that we also have dinner with our parents and play instruments and sports and do all the things that like all the other kids do too? And so all of my books are very much about, exploring the everyday slice of life stuff so that we feel like very much that we have more in common with everybody than otherizing us. And so that's really my way into my writing.
Right. Zenia, what are your thoughts on this? Do you think that the stories you have to tell kind of are like Sheetal said, that it's more of a, to put out narratives out there about our community, or also about, the folk tales that our grandmothers used to tell and stuff?
Well, I think certainly in my writing, I don't see them as sort of telling the tales of my grandparents. I think it's sort of almost telling the stories of my generation or of a future generation. One of the things that I have seen growing up is, I would always imagine reading stories and wondering, what would this story be with brown eyes, or what would this story be with a brown lens on it? What would the sounds would be different, the dialogue would be different, the sensory experience would be different. And so in many ways, when I sort of think about stories, I think about, well, how could it be different if it was being held in my household? And that's kind of the way that I took the story that I wrote, is I took something that people were familiar with, I think people that they knew, and I put those brown eyes on it. And just told it in a different way that would resonate not only with those in the diaspora, but those who are not a part of the culture and the community at all. So there was a connection for them in perhaps their own culture, but there was something else that they could take from this and learn something new.
Got it. So taking your point forward about that, your book is obviously, it's a reminiscent of an old Christmas classic.
That's right.
So tell us, why did you decide to structure your book around Diwali, and what do you think are the roles of the traditions and rituals of our culture in today's in children's lives today, especially in the diaspora?
You know, it's funny. I actually didn't set out to write a story about Diwali. If for those who are familiar with the book, and if you aren't, I'll just show you. You know, the character right here on the front is what I call the Mithai monster, and that character is what came to me when I was pregnant. You know, that was the idea. I had a tray of mithai in front of my face. I took a really funny picture with me trying to gobble the whole thing down. And my husband and I looked at it and I said, that looks like a mithai monster. There's a character there. And in my head, that story was that character had a story of being like the Indian version of Cookie Monster. And that's what I wanted to bring to life. So I tried writing stories over the last several years, and they weren't as interesting, or they weren't coming out in the way that I wanted them to come out. And then as I mentioned, I had this idea of sort of taking that brown lens on stories, and that's when I sort of came up with the "'Twas the Night Before Diwali." And at the time, I hadn't figured out that the character was going to work in this book. But as I started writing it, it sort of it came together that way. And so it was nice in that I was able to sort of introduce for many kids, both in the diaspora and out, some of the elements and some of the traditions that go around Diwali. But in many ways, I introduced something completely new. As much as the Mithai monster was sort of the Indian version of Cookie Monster, I realized in some ways that she actually also had a bit of Santa Claus in her. Right. And so it was sort of melding, it was creating something new and something different that, you know, kids could take on and create something different with.
That's nice. That's very interesting. Speaking of traditions, Sheetal, why did you choose the tabla as an instrument that Anjali plays? I remember a scene from your book where she's, I think, sitting around the living room and playing the tabla. And I think there's a visitor in the house and they're like, oh, is that tabla your dad's? And she's like, no. And then her dad pops out from the kitchen. So I'm also interested about the gender roles and why you chose tabla as a specific instrument that Anjali plays.
So there's layers to this answer. I like to talk about kind of, quote, bigger things in kids' world. And right. So I don't think there's anything we can't talk to our kids about. I think they want to hear it. I think they want in. And so I just try to make it appropriate for them. And like in the first book, we're dealing with racism and bullying. And in this book, we're dealing with misogyny as one of the layers. And I had a different book that I had written for the second in the series a few years ago. And then the world was what it was. And I was very angry. And found myself feeling like, again, if we don't nip this in the bud with our youngest, we're going to continue having the same patterns out there. And so I thought, how can I take this into kids' world? And then, you know, what I do at the end of each of the Anjali books is I put a little Easter egg to give a little clue for the next book. And at the end of Always Anjali, there's a picture of Anjali playing the tabla. Now, at the time, I had no idea what that was going to be. But when I looked at it again, I thought, that's it. The tabla is a predominantly male-dominated instrument. You don't see as many women playing it or girls. Right. And I thought, Anjali's going to play the tabla. She's going to be the only girl in class, and she's going to be the best, and they're not going to like it. And that's where the story begins. And so I picked it specifically because it is an instrument that is dominated by men.
Right. And I was mentioning about the scene where the dad pops his head out of the kitchen. I found that really interesting as well. And so telling about how you're breaking the gender norms in the traditional Indian household.
Yeah, that's very intentional. All of those things in both books, the dad is meant to be the stay-at-home dad. He has the apron on. It's very, very intentional. And that moment where she's taking her tabla out and the auntie's kind of like, oh, you're so sweet setting that up for your dad. That came from me calling, you know, I found a few people who are female tabla players. And when I listened to their stories, every single one of them had that same story where people always thought they were setting it up for their dad. People did not think that they were playing it. And so there's a lot of little like microaggressions layered into the book for that reason.
Okay. So also, I think that's really interesting. And so in nowadays in children's books, I remember when I was growing up, there weren't a lot of illustrations in the books that I read, at least. So tell me something, how important do you think content is versus the illustrations? Do you think the content holds more weight, or do you think that the illustrations are just as important, if not more?
I think they go, I mean, or Zenia, I don't
No, go ahead.
Zenia, why don't you go ahead?
I mean, I think they're equally important. You can't have one without the other, especially for this age group. For illustrated books, they're meant to be, you know, that's why they're called picture books. Right. And you can't have one without the other. I mean, when you have a really great illustrator, which we both have, they bring the story out in a way that your words can't, so much so that you end up revising your text. I mean, the illustrator that I work with and I collaborate so much that once we see what she's doing, I'm like, oh, I don't need this. I don't need this. I'll move that, whatever. And so it's really collaborative, and there's no way you can tell the story without both of those pieces working together effortlessly, in my opinion.
Okay. Zenia, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to agree. I mean, I think that there are examples of fabulous children's books that have great content and no illustrations, like, you know, the book with no pictures, for example. Right. And then and similarly, there are wonderful children's books that have just beautiful illustrations and little to no words that have been very successful. But I think for the most part, they are equally important. I wouldn't be able to say that one is necessarily one over the other. And certainly in when I was developing, you know, my book, and I had, you know, the character in mind, there was this, you know, this image that I wanted to get on the page for children. And so when I was looking for my illustrator, I needed someone who had that whimsical nature, who was able to bring the vibrancy of the color and those vibrancies that are very much a part of Diwali and just, you know, South Asian culture in general. So that was really important to me. And when we put the book together, you know, I didn't have a lot of room to play with the words, but in terms of what my illustrator was able to do, because it was sort of set in that rhythmic way. But she, not being South Asian, was able to sort of take that and really, you know, illustrate it in a way that I thought was beautiful. And if I look at the reviews now, or I hear the comments back about the book, so much is about what a wonderful, fun story to read, but wow, those illustrations, like so we know that those illustrations really do make an impact, really can carry that story to making it worthwhile, because there is that part of, also, you can have fabulous illustrations and poor text, and really fabulous text and poor illustrations, and you know how horrible that can look. Right. And so you really, really need not only both equally, but you need them to marry so well together.
That's right. So I'm guessing both of you kind of collaborate with your illustrators and work out the image that you have in your mind, and it has to make sense on paper, right?
Absolutely.
And I'm sure it also helps that the illustrations help people who are not part of the South Asian culture, like it helps them kind of picture the costumes, the dresses that go along with Diwali, or what mithai means, so they can kind of see what it means. And yeah, I think I agree with you guys as well, that illustrations, especially in young children's books, are just as important as the content. So yeah. Another question that comes to mind is, reading both your books and seeing your books, you both have a girl protagonist in your books, right? So in today's age, I mean, being a mother of a young girl myself, of a baby girl myself, I applaud this fact. But just to play the devil's advocate, do you think that the little boys of today kind of feel left out? And they might think that, oh, everything's about girls, and you know, although I love that it is about girls, if I may say so.
I certainly don't think so. I mean, that was very, very intentional on my part, that not only was my daughter reflected as a main character in the book, but that the mithai monster herself was female. That was very, very intentional. I personally think that there's ample books out there that still have boys as the leading character. And so they're not going to feel left out for a very long time to come. I think, on the contrary, to sort of embrace the opportunity to not necessarily think about the gender roles, but see that more balanced representation and just get immersed in the book for the sake of the book, right? And its content.
Right.
Yeah, I'll just add to, I mean, I agree with what Zenia is saying. There is no such thing as a boy book and a girl book. Really, it's not. And I think and it's up to us to make sure our kids know that, because at the end of the day, it's really about the content and the narrative and what we're putting out there. And frankly, I agree with Zenia, like the world is taking care of boys feeling fine. They will have no problem feeling like they're the center of the universe. It's fine. But I would say reading books with them not at the center of the story is better for society and for themselves, and will make a big difference.
It will.
I like that thinking. So going with that, I'm going to ask you to read, maybe Sheetal, you can go first. If you could read a few lines, maybe your favorite part from the book, and talk to us about why it's your favorite part.
Well, I can't say it's my favorite because you can't pick favorites, of course. But I will just read a part of the book where, so as we mentioned, Anjali, it starts off with Anjali in her tabla class, and I'll just show everybody the picture quickly. She's in her tabla class. She's the only girl, and they're kind of like making fun of her because she's really good at it. And so she starts messing up on purpose because she doesn't want that attention. And then she realizes like they're all having practices without her and they're not inviting her. And so she really starts shrinking herself and not being who she is and the best that she is. And then cut to, there is a contest where the winner of the contest gets to play with her teacher. And she has to really decide, what she's going to do. And all these little things keep happening with her good friend Deepak, who she grew up with, and he's in her school and he's talking about her and he's saying, they only care about her because she's a girl. She's really not that good. And all these things keep happening. And she gets to the point where she just can't take it anymore. And she's trying to talk to him and she can't talk to him. And then she has a moment where she just goes to the bathroom and has a big, like all the stuff comes out of her, which I always say, like our kids, we all have these big feelings and all this stuff comes out and all this stuff comes out. And she's so upset. And in that moment, after she has this big kind of like inner monologue coming out of her, this other girl just simply says to her, "Never dim your light." And she takes that. And then this is what I'll read. So she takes that in. It was the day of the recital and the hall was buzzing. Anjali was in the bathroom trying to calm her nerves. She had decided that she may not win the contest, but she was going to do her very best. She thought about the first time she ever saw someone playing tabla. His hands and the beautiful sounds he was creating had mesmerized her so much, she had come home and made her own tabla set out of old yogurt containers. She wasn't going to let anyone make her feel bad for being good at something, especially something as much as she loved. Especially something she loved as much as tabla. That's that. And then she had dreamed of a moment like this. She reviewed the compositions in her mind and looked at herself in the mirror. I can do this. Nice. And then we go into the contest and you can imagine what happens.
That's all about reading books, imagination. But I think that's such amazing, wonderful piece of advice for little children, not only girls, but just little children.
All around, yeah.
Yeah.
It's really about standing in your power, and feeling like giving ourselves permission to. And all of us, how many times have we not been the best we can be out of fear of someone this or that, exactly. Or how they feel, whatever. And it's really about, standing in your power and celebrating who you are.
Right. And I also think it addresses a very real concern of bullying in school and everything. And I just think it sends such a wonderful message out there for our young viewers. So thank you for that. Thank you for reading. Zenia, would you like to go ahead?
Sure. Not sure how well you can see that. I think I've got some blur in my screen, but so it was the night before Diwali is, as many know, the Christmas poem. Starts out with that evening and all the stuff that is around a house at Christmas time, and this is no different, except that there is a little creature in the house, instead of no creature. There is a little creature in the house, and but no one knows what it is, and the Matai start disappearing, and they're trying to figure out who it is. So I'll start somewhere in the middle of the book here. In the corner there stood the cutest little critter with almond-shaped eyes and a braided tail of glitter. Not a mouse nor a hamster, a completely different breed. Never had we seen before this new creature indeed. Hello, little one. Will you tell me your name? Where did you come from? I asked with no blame. Her eyes peeked out with lashes so lush and fuzzy blue hair that needed a brush. So I'll leave it there, as it's one of the parts that Georgia sort of introduces the character. And when I was thinking about what she would look like, these are the things that I was telling the illustrator. She has almond-shaped eyes, and there's got to be, South Asian features in her. So let's put a braid maybe in there, and some glitter, and some things that might be more stereotypical of what you might think of some of the Indian traits and features, but something that's also whimsical and colorful and fun to look at. And so that's how she comes out. And of course, she the creature walks away and runs away with some of the Matai. They find her. And then the little girl in the story, she runs away so that she doesn't know anything more. She doesn't get to have that chance to have that conversation with the Matai monster, and she wants to know more. And her grandparents go on to tell her that, this is, the creature comes to houses where the diyas shine bright, and it comes and it's auspicious that the Matai monster shows up, and it's good luck. So she goes on with the rest of her night, and she finds Mitai crumbs in her bed, and of course the little creature at the end of the book just wishes everybody a happy Diwali.
Oh, that's so sweet. I also love how the little girl in the poem, I love how she's so curious about this critter, and she's not scared at all, and it's just without any reservation, she goes ahead to her and asks her, where did you come from? Who are you? Without any of the, I don't know if I should say discriminatory lenses or something that most grown-ups have today, unfortunately. But just the curiosity of a child is so amazing.
Yeah, and I think, we've grown up in a culture that also has made monsters as bad things. There's very few stories where we see monsters as cute, wonderful, good things. And so for me, this was, let's flip this around and introduce more positivity, more changing the stereotype, if you will, on what that is.
Let's not be scared of the monster under bed.
No, especially not the Matai monster.
So true. So now for children out there who are reading your book, what do you think would be the key takeaway, or what do you want the key takeaway to be from your books? I know we've kind of spoken about this through the various questions today, but just if you have to consolidate your key takeaway for the little children today, what would you say? Zenia?
I've often thought about, in the writing process, should there be a sort of a moral to the story? And I think in many books, there are, even if they aren't sort of overt, there's always sort of something to learn. With this, there wasn't anything in my head that I wanted to get across in terms of a moral to the story. I wanted it to be pure entertainment. I wanted it to be simple and whimsical. And I think I got that across. And I think the other part of it was simply, if there was something that came across, if there was something that I wanted children to walk away with, was just to understand how fun, this time with family can be, and how you can create new traditions and new stories around this. And we don't have to, I will admit that I'm actually not a very religious person. But there are certain traditions and certain ideas and that come around through culture and through the South Asian culture and through Hindu culture that I quite like. And so I think you can take what it is that you resonate with, and you can create your own new traditions and add to that.
All right. Thank you. Sheetal, what would you like to tell our young viewers? What should they take away from your book?
There's this amazing writer. If you don't know him, please go read all of his stuff. His name is Jason Reynolds, and I adore him. And I think he says it better than I could ever. And he's Black, and he says that he writes to Black children, but writes for all children. And that really resonates with me, in this idea that all of my stories and themes are very broad. It's all like, in the first book, it's about teaching kids that they never have to change anything about themselves to, quote, fit in. In this book, it's teaching kids to stand in their power and celebrating who they're, all of those things are broad themes that I don't think we can overstate, over-repeat, like constantly telling our kids. But I also, I am speaking to the little brown kids and telling them, like, you are worthy of having a series where you are the hero of the story, where you are the person with everything else happens around, and you don't need to explain who you are. You need to justify your existence. You exist, you're worthy. And so I think it's multifold for me. And I think it's going to affect people in different ways, depending on where you come at it from.
Right. So thank you so much. I think these are such important lessons that kids can take away from both your books. I mean, they're just so full of underlying meaning and stuff, which hopefully, lots of children who get to read more and more books can take away from here. I just want another question that comes to mind is when I was very young, being a reader myself, I would have these few favorite authors who I would follow from, say, early childhood up to my adolescent years, Enid Blyton being one of them, I think a lot of children my age have grown up reading her. So are there any plans of you kind of progressing your books in such a way that adolescent children as well read them? Or do you plan to just stick to this age group?
I do have other books that I've written that are in the works, that are a little bit older. So I don't know. We'll see. It's so funny. A lot of people have asked me, can we make a YA version of Anjali and do a series of those? I don't know. Let's see. Let's just let's take it one day at a time.
Okay.
But I do have a number of books right now in various stages of process that have not been announced, that are some are a little bit older, and some, so yes, I'm open to it all. We'll see what happens.
Okay. Zenia, what about you? I know this is
this one is very much based at that children's level, and if it turns into a series, I think it'll stay that way. I too have other books that are in the works, and at the moment they're picture book based, and they haven't been announced as well. But I would say, I would argue that if you were to take a good poll of this audience, you would say that there's a lot of adults who love children's books and love picture books, and are still a big part of that audience. And so, it doesn't, for me, it's like, if I continue doing picture books, I'm sure I'm going to have an adult audience to follow some of them as well.
Well, and I think because a lot of us didn't have books that centered, kids that look like us. So I hear, like Zenia said, I hear from people all the time, like, I want your books for me, they are,
right.
And they say picture books are timeless. They're for all ages at all times.
I know I enjoyed reading your books, so it was so nice.
There's no better way to enjoy a book than kind of snuggled up with your child reading together. And so it's great if it can, everybody's together on it.
That's true. That is so true. So do you have any advice for young South Asian authors, or maybe young children who are looking to start writing in this field in children's literature, of storytelling or something? Do you have any advice to give them?
If you want to do it every day. and get into a practice of it. It's like, I always like to say, if you wanted to be a gymnast, you would be training every day. If you want to be a writer, or if you want whatever it is you want to do, you need to be doing it every day in some way. And that doesn't mean you're writing for like 5 hours a day. Maybe you will some days, but some days you might not be able to. But I encourage, especially when I do, visits with kids in schools, when they say like, I get stuck, I don't know what to do. And I said, if you feel that, just write down 5 words, just write down 1 sentence, whatever it is. And then you'll come back to it another day where they might mean something to you that you can expand on. But it's important to get into the practice of doing it every day.
Thank you. Zenia, do you have any advice that you would like to give? Sorry, can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry, I think I froze for a second there.
No problem.
Gotta love these virtual things. Yeah, I know. The practice of writing every day is absolutely an important one. But I think if you're really talking to a very young audience, those younger kids, one of the things that I have found there are some wonderful toys and tools out there for kids to get into the habit of writing stories. And my daughter received a fabulous one when she was 5, and I'm trying to remember the name of it, but it's like a story time box, and there are about 3 different packages. There's plates that come out, and they have different backgrounds and sceneries. So one's a beach, one's in space, one's in school, one's a castle. There's about a dozen different kinds of backgrounds, and then you pull out a character one box is characters. So you pull out a character, and one box is objects, and you pull out objects. And the third one is, a creature of some sort, and you pull that out as well. And the idea is you put them down on the board, and you have to use all of that to come up with a story and tell a story. And it's just it's a fun and creative exercise to get you thinking in really weird ways, because you might get a camel and a policeman and a monster out in space. And so what do you do with that, right? And you have to come up with a story. So my daughter used to love that. I would highly recommend, getting something like that if you've got a really young person in your house who's got that interest and sometimes gets stuck, and you just have to push, and it might sound weird, but that's okay. That's a fun story too. So get into those creative exercises and do those kinds of things.
That's nice. I think that's such an amazing idea. I think it works well for adults as well.
For sure.
So another question I had was, you guys obviously have a vast audience over here in the West, but would you say that you have an audience, or you have a market in South Asia for South Asian books that are published in the West? Have you broken into that market yet?
I don't know. I mean, for me, I think that there's always an audience, because I think that there tends to be this interest in stories from the West, even in India. But some of them may or may not be as relevant to the things that they're growing up with. But in other cases, it's just, for lack of a better word, that fascination of Western stories. And some I think will work, and some won't. I haven't sort of really pushed far in the market in India just yet. Really more focusing on North America and the UK is sort of where I think for me the book is right now. But that could change.
Okay. All right. Good to know. Sheetal?
Yeah, we just actually signed a deal to take Anjali to lots of different countries. So let's see. we will see. I mean, I agree with Zenia. I think there's audiences, some for different reasons, but whatever it may be. But I do think that people want good content. At the end of the day, good content is good content. Right. And I cannot tell you how many messages I get from people around the world, from different countries, from all the way from the Philippines to Russia to Portugal to Australia, saying, where can I get your book? Where can I get your book? And so I'm really excited that they will be getting my books in different languages in different places in their countries.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great news. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So we have a few questions from the audience. Sheetal, there's a question for you specifically. What do you enjoy more, acting or writing books for kids?
You know, that is like asking me which one of my kids do I love the most. It is impossible, you know, and I've been obviously acting longer. I've been acting since the 90s. And so I think people assume that is, you know, kind of my big, it is what I love, and I can't imagine my life without it. And when I started writing books, I didn't know how I would feel about it, to be honest, because it was newer to me. But it has been such joy for me, so much more joy. And I mean, I'm gonna like weep thinking about it, what it has brought into my life, which is why I can't stop. And I have all these other books that I'm reading, so I cannot stop. But I also can't see myself in a world where I'm not doing both. And I feel like it's a privilege to create kids content in whatever form it is. And so, you know, basically that's Sophie's choice, so I have no answer.
Fair enough. All right, we have another question from the audience. I think it's for both of you. Since South Asia is so diverse when it comes to languages, festivals, customs, rituals, etc., do you ever worry about trying to cater to as many readers as you can of South Asian descent?
It's a really good question, actually. I remember when I was writing Twas the Night Before Diwali, and I was sharing it with some friends to sort of get their take on it. There was a comment of, you know, not everybody uses the words nani and nana or dadi and dadu. And so do you want to make that broader? Or, you know, mitai isn't the word that all communities will use, and there's other words that can be used as well. And I realized that there was never going to be something that was going to cater to everybody. You kind of just have to go with the story that resonates with you, that you're comfortable writing about as well. And so that's what I did, and in hopes that, you know, people will sort of see the similarity in the words, or see enough familiar content that the story still speaks to them.
Okay.
And I think in the specificity, you get the universal.
Right. Got it. Okay. So I don't think we have any more questions from the audience. I'm going to ask one last question, a very lighthearted question. What was your favorite book growing up?
Oh, goodness. You know what? I don't know that I have an answer for that. That's a really tough one. I was surrounded by books, read them all the time, but I don't know that as a kid, I can remember the one that stood out for me the most. Certainly growing up, I think I probably have some different answers, but I don't know as a kid that I could give you that answer.
No, any book that stood out to you? Like you were saying, there was one book that stood out.
When I was older, yeah, when I was older, then there were, I could tell you books that I would call as some of my favorites. But as a kid, I'm not sure that there was one that did it for me, or that changed things for me. There were too many wonderful stories to read. I don't know about you, Sheetal?
Yeah, no, I mean, any question that asks me what my favorite is about anything, I'm
at a loss.
I cannot subscribe to these questions, like asking me to just like lists and favorites and stuff. It's ever evolving. I have no idea, but agreed. I read everything. I was a big reader. I loved it all. I went through all of my phases, and I vividly remember there was a phase where all I wanted to read it was like Roman and Greek mythology. And then I remember all I wanted to read was Nancy Drew. And then all I wanted to read was like Ramona and like it. I did it all. I read it all. I remember I was going through like a horror phase, and I only wanted to read scary things. So I think the point is that like we loved books, and it obviously opens up the worlds that you want to just kind of lose yourself in. And so it was definitely a place where I found peace.
Awesome. That's nice. I mean, that's the way I felt as well growing up. I mean, books were like my safe haven, my kind of, you know, calm away from all the hustle and bustle and everything, just a place of zen for me.
Yeah.
So, okay, we have another question from the audience. How did your kids react when they read your books?
They're a big test market, right? Or your first test market, whether
exactly.
they're biased or not. for my daughter Wadhwani, she totally got into it. She was very supportive and loved it. But I think the best response that I got from her was after I had sort of told her that this was coming to life, and I think that I had showed to her. She said, "Mommy, I'm going to start writing a book now. And can you make sure that it gets published?" And that to me was just like, that's golden. Okay, so I've done a parenting check mark for the day, is that I have inspired her to write her own stories,
Right,
and letting her know that no age is a limit to doing that. She probably needs a little bit more coaching on what's required to actually get into life. But she is inspired, and that to me was the best reaction I could ask for.
I'm sure she has a great role model. Sheetal,
That's
what
so
about
nice.
you?
That's so nice, Zenia, because my kids are like a tough audience. my kids, I always joke, yes, they're a focus group. My kids are 4 and 7. And they are brutally honest with me. I read all the drafts of all the versions of all the things I'm working on with them, and they're very clear if they did not like something, and why they don't like it. And they're very invested in kind of where it ends up. And then if I make a choice that they don't agree with, they're very vocal about it.
That's good.
It is quite interesting.
I know they are a tough audience. I mean, I think you guys have taken up such an amazing task of trying to mold the young generation's mindset. And it's such an amazing thing to, impart knowledge to them, impart all these views and things that could be, and just sparking their imagination and inspiring them. It's such an amazing task. And thank you so much for doing that for the young generation. So I think with this, we're going to wrap up the session. Thank you so much, Zenia and Sheetal, for joining us. I think this was an amazing conversation, and I'm sure the viewers have a lot to take home and discuss about with their children, with their parents, whatever. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us. And this session will be available on Facebook and Tasveer TV and various platforms. So please spread the word, let them go and watch it even later. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you.
You all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.